Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for April 30th, 2024. Today I'm going to be talking about the lamentable Antony Blinken riding into shuttle diplomacy on a lame or even a dead horse, one that was actually initially ridden by Kissinger and Brzezinski in their battles in the 60s and 70s and 80s to reshape a world order based on British geopolitics. Now, we've been talking about the Blinken trip lately, and it's a perfect example of what's wrong with Western policy. He's attempting to divide Russia and China against each other. And as he was in Beijing, he made threats to China. Now he's on his way to the Middle East, and he's trying to split the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Arab League, split them around a mission to support Israel and oppose Iran. Now, what's the whole point of this? It's to preserve the control of a global corporate oligarchy, backed by the US and NATO military power, at a moment of wars that this Western force is losing. And it's not only losing the wars, it's losing the public relations battle in the world as the global majority is turning against the unipolar order that Blinken represents. Now, just to make the point about Kissinger, what you have is someone who was a Rockefeller agent who admitted in the early 1980s in a speech at Chatham House that as Secretary of State, he operated from British documents, that he was a committed adherent of the British geopolitical doctrine, in his case, the idea of a balance of power, but that he was involved in a policy of détente with the Soviet Union and an opening to China. That's what people think he did. What he was actually doing was trying to make sure that the two emerging powers, the Soviet Union and China, would be at each other's throats, and that each would think the United States is supporting them. Now, this was occurring when? In the midst of the US engaged in a bloody war in Vietnam, which was a major turning point in the US becoming a global empire. Now, with Brzezinski, he's known for the Islamic card, trying to play Islamic radicalism against the Soviet Union, as he did in Afghanistan, as he promoted something called the Bernard Lewis Plan, once again operating from British working papers. Bernard Lewis was a top British operative who was committed to this idea of the clash of civilizations and how you can use a divide and conquer strategy to preserve an empire. And in the case of Kissinger and Brzezinski, they were doing this for the American empire, but in cooperation and, in fact, consultation with the British Empire. Now, Blinken goes to China with the threat of sanctions and trade war unless they stop providing what are known as dual-use technologies to Russia, which allegedly Russia is using in the war in Ukraine. Now, there's Blinken going there after just receiving the go-ahead from Congress to provide $8 billion to Taiwan to enable them to prepare for a war against China. Now, there's also a rumor that the U.S. may be trying to find an end to the Ukraine war, which is lost, by offering a deal to Russia to win Russia away from the alliance with China. Now, would this be to save Ukraine? Of course not. This, in terms of both the Russia and China side, is to break up the BRICS, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Now, Blinken's next stop is in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, among others, where he's trying to build a coalition against Iran with Israel. Now, Lindsey Graham said that he's been talking to Tony and Jake, Blinken and Jake Sullivan, about this. So there's bipartisan support for this approach. The problem is, what Arab leader could now turn his government to support the policies of Netanyahu, who's clearly trying to drive the Palestinians out of Palestine through a brutal ethnic cleansing policy? Can any Arab leader ally with Netanyahu? Now, if he does go ahead with the assault on Rafah, which appears likely, and labels anyone against him as anti-Semitic, he's on a downward course. It's only a matter of time before Netanyahu's gone. The question is, can Israel survive him? Now, Netanyahu is reportedly afraid he's about to be indicted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. And there are reports that he's contacting Biden, Baerbock in Germany, Cameron, and others, pleading with them to intervene on his behalf with the court to stop an indictment. And what he's reportedly saying is, if this happens to him, it could happen to anyone, and it would be a dangerous precedent. Well, that's the whole point of the court, to stop genocide and to make it clear that if Netanyahu is indicted as a war criminal, other leaders will be held accountable, including those who are supporting Netanyahu, those who are supporting Zelensky. After all, we're still waiting for indictments of George Bush and Dick Cheney and Wolfowitz, Blair, and others for their launching genocidal war against Iraq based on the lies about weapons of mass destruction. The same is true of those who refused to negotiate with Putin for joint security guarantees from 2014 to 2022. As a matter of fact, we're still waiting for accountability from those who lied, those members of the Obama National Security Team who lied about Russiagate, such as John Brennan, to try to destroy the potential for Trump to achieve a peace agreement with Russia. So let's go deeper to this question of BRICS. What is the whistle-stop shuttle diplomacy today that Blinken's carrying out? Well, Russia and China are at the heart of the BRICS. The BRICS represent an alliance of sovereign governments which are looking for a shift in the international financial and development architecture in favor of economic development of the real physical economies of sovereign nations, as opposed to piling or providing resources to a collapsing Western empire. And if you look at the attempt to split Russia and China, you look at the moves into the Middle East. What's going on in the Middle East right now? Well, you have Iran, you have United Arab Emirates, the Saudis, Ethiopia, coming into the BRICS. This is a real threat to the British geopolitical idea that you must keep these nations divided. Now, Brzezinski and Kissinger had differences in their approach, but the same intent. In the post-John F. Kennedy world, after he was assassinated, the U.S. became the center of a transfer of power globally from the British Empire to the Pax Americana, with the U.S. as the policeman of the world. And it laid the basis for the post-1992 proclamation by the Bush crowd of the end of history, the triumph of liberal democracy, with the U.S. as the sole superpower and the enforcer of peace. But in reality, it's been an era of permanent war and an end of sovereignty. The total subordination of national policies to geopolitics, to divide and conquer. And what has this meant for you? Well, unless you're a Bill Gates or a Zuckerberg or a Bezos or a Musk or a Larry Fink, one of the corporate billionaires, what's in it for you is an uncertain future of permanent war and austerity. The U.S. is deeper in debt than ever, $34 trillion and counting. It's growing at the fastest rate in history, with a price tag of $1 trillion a year in interest on that debt. And much of that debt is from these wars. The military expenditures itself are now over $1 trillion when you add in the Ukraine-Israel package to the almost $900 billion of the regular defense budget, and then the whole CIA black bag operations. It's over $1 trillion a year. Meanwhile, there's nothing left for revival of infrastructure, just a crazy policy of inefficient and anti-growth green technologies. Nothing for education, nothing for healthcare. Forget it. And so you're being saddled with the debt to keep the billionaires liquid by their ability to loot an empire which is rejecting them. The result is the U.S. is increasingly isolated and disrespected. No future. Aha! Who else sees this besides nations of the global south? A growing portion of America's youth. That's why the campuses are the scene of an explosion of organizing activity, not of anti-Semitism, but of anti-genocide. The young people are out in force. They're being threatened, they're being beaten, they're being expelled from school, but they're continuing to build on their mobilization because they don't see a future in the America of Biden or the bipartisan war parties. A new CNN poll came out which said that 71% of Americans disapprove of Biden's handling of the war between Israel and Hamas. That was the language in the poll. But what it means is that the support of Netanyahu and his policy of genocide is rejected by nearly 3/4 of the whole American population that was polled. 81% of Americans between 18 and 34 disapprove. And that's what we're seeing on the campuses. Now, perhaps Blinken should reflect on this ongoing shift, both in world opinion and within the United States, as he rides this broken down horse into battle. The world doesn't need a revival of a Kissinger or Brzezinski doctrine. It needs a new strategic and development architecture, such as the one that the Schiller Institute's Helga LaRouche has been fighting for. And that's the policy that you should join us to fight for. So thanks for joining me. See you again tomorrow.